So we'll have some time for Q&A here. But I wanted to kind of pick up on some of the themes that we've had the opportunity to talk about here going in to this event. One of which has kind of stood out to me in listening to you talk this evening is the whole, well, let me preface it with something that left a big impression of me with respect to the role of education in preparing our leaders, not just for today, for our current context, for this future context that we're quickly stepping into with much more uncertainty, much more precarity, you might say. It was an acceptance letter to Oberlin that a friend received from David Orr. And the way he put it was that there's always going to be a certain part of education that's about passing on or transmitting specific information, what we already know. But the bigger part of what they were trying to build their system around was helping people learn the skills to be able to pick up and figure out, learn things that they couldn't even anticipate yet. Mm-hmm. Stepping into this uncertainty and being able to be the next generation of leaders, per se. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder, as you've experienced your own journey there at Mary Lee and working with students, watching that kind of continuum of eco-leader develop, as you highlighted in the slide, what stands out to you about what that process of educating this next generation of leaders means?
Well, one of the things I think about, since the most teaching that I've done is actually in the graduate program, so I've been teaching in that for the last 11 years since we started it. And so teaching a course on leadership for environmental programs and centers is to see the ways they engage in understanding themselves, which for me is a really important part. So if you're going to be an effective leader, if you don't understand yourself, you're going to go crosswise all the time and not understand why that's happening. And so I've appreciated seeing how students respond to that very quickly. It's not that they don't understand it at all before, but kind of it resonates with them at a new level. And then to see them start to practice it at a certain level within the course itself. But then within the course, I have a project that they do. And they can design an environmental center for anywhere in the world. Most students end up, even with this very attractive anywhere in the world sort of thing, they often will pick a place that's familiar to them, like a place they want to go. It may be home, it may have been a place they had lived for a period of time. Somehow they already resonate with that land itself. And then they end up designing this center in all of its facets, from mission statements to budgets, and personnel things, but they're building out of something that's a passion within them. And so that creates this energy that enables them to actually be able to be effective when they go out there. And so they end up with this portfolio of this center they designed. And now that we're 11 years in, there are multiple students who end up communicating back to us about what they're doing. And I think, oh my goodness, that's what they wrote about in their project. Now, it's not that they are the actual designers of a center necessarily, but they're working at places that are similar, they're pursuing ideas, and so finding this core that I've talked about a couple times tonight, for them, I think is the way that the passion and the hope for addressing difficult issues starts to emerge, because they can see the ways that one needs to build community. I've been blessed to have this amazing team at Mary Lee. As we interact with each other, and of course the grad students come in and start to intersect with that. But we have developed a community in our work setting that's encouraging. It doesn't mean that we don't have tensions or frictions, but we have this relationship that helps us work through that. And then for the students to also participate directly with that. And we work on this in our undergrad programs as well. So then they have some modelings of how do you work together? What does it look like? And we're not trying to be the perfect model. We're just trying to be a really good model that we can interact with.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to offer for Luke right now?
I think when initially started out and you pointed out how all is just that, all is important. And then I got to thinking about, for me, that faith is trusting that God is present in all. And that's when the all fills in any loopholes of what it's about. But off of that, I was also wondering if animals do not start, because plants and animals are part of it, but then you have humans that are there, so you're feeling that. But I assume that they would also get to know about the wildlife and how that interconnects with everything else.
Right. Yeah. And so for the students, I mean, one of our goals. So we've had students who've come for day trips for years and years and years, which is a really good experience. And sometimes we're just kind of blown away when a student comes back who was there one day and they remember it 20 years later as being important in their life. Well, that's great. And they often were involved in some kind of natural history, exploring nature kind of thing that was energizing to them. And there were kindergartners there today doing that very sort of thing. But with our collegiate programs, as we developed this residential kind of work, one of our goals was to be able to have the students immerse more deeply in all of the natural systems, so understanding the plants and animals at a certain level, not that they become the top ecologists necessarily, but they have a framework or a base for being able to understand natural systems and the roles of intersection that we have as humans. So that we as humans are not out here somewhere and the environment is over here. No, we're all intersecting. So our programs are set up that way. And there are parts of our program that are quite formal. You saw me standing talking to the grad students in a grad classroom, but they were in that classroom today for part of the time, and the next thing you know, they're heading out with Bill Minter and they're out in the field for the rest of the day. That's the classroom that they're in. And so all of our programs, the box kind of classroom is just a staging ground for getting out into the natural world classroom that becomes an important part of the teaching as well. Good question.
I see all the programming that you've developed through the years, and I'm wondering if there's any point at which you said, well, we're getting off of what we want to be doing, let's retract, let's do something different here. Did that ever happen, or was it all pretty organically?
Well, I mean, we've done very regular planning work together. So the concepts that you see up here, like some of those maps that I had with all the programmatic development in it, those were not things that were somehow in my back pocket when I arrived. It was, I mean, I remember a newspaper asking me, so Luke, this is my first 2 months. So what are you going to do with Mary Lee? What's your plan? It's like, it's the wrong question. I don't have a plan. I'll work at learning. I want to understand what history has been and what my team is interested in. Now, obviously, I've become very embedded in that and very committed to it. But I think the organic nature of what makes sense here, like why did we choose to do sustainable agriculture? Well, we can step back today and say, well, it's a really big need, therefore we did it. We actually said, so what does our land of Mary Lee tell us we should be studying? Well, we're surrounded by agriculture. A bunch of our land had been farmed. Indigenous people had used it in other ways. And so it was like, oh, there's a food connection that would make sense. Another one had to do with the fact that we were at the headwaters of the southern branch of the Elkhart River. We should be paying attention to watersheds. And that informs a whole set of the work that we do with our sustainability leadership. Like how do you lead within a watershed? The world's pretty big to lead in. You probably can lead in a watershed or a part of a watershed, but to lead, to change the world is a grand notion, but we most likely are going to change the world into being a healthier place if we work one watershed or one micro watershed at a time. And so I think there was an organic development. I would say that there were points along the way and we would start into a new planning session and the team members are feeling like it's really full already, and are we saying that we need to add something more? And so there have been times that we have scaled back and said, we don't program on Mondays during the height of programming time. We probably could film those Mondays, Marcos, a couple times, right, with schools that want to come. And we say, no, that's not going to create a healthy system for everybody on the team. It's not going to create a healthy system for our grad students. We need to step back and say, no, we don't need to do all of that. And that was hard. When you have students wanting to come and learn and you tell them you can't come, I mean, no, the point is you have to do it in a healthy way and finding that balance. And hopefully there are other centers out there that they can also find and connect in with as well. We've had a couple of occasions where we said, well, we're going to stop doing that because it really doesn't fit into our mission. And some of you probably attended the Sunflower Festival once upon a time, right? That was a program we did. We stopped doing it because it really didn't do anything about teaching about environmental education, or very, very small. And people loved the event. And they were like, well, so what about your mission? We like the event. Let's just keep doing it. It's like, no, we're focusing on that. So yes, we have worked on it, struggled with it, and that will continue to happen as well.
Millennials get knocked for a lot of things, but one of them is that sense of everything needs to be immediate. And how do you deal with that, giving them that ecological time frame about a broader perspective?
Yeah, it's actually adults our age need to figure that out too. But you're right. I mean, it can feel like time is running really fast, and if we don't change something now, it's just going to all fall apart, or there are all kinds of scenarios one can think about. I think I can speak maybe best to that with how we designed the Sustainability Leadership Program, which is a whole fall semester, full load of credit hours that students take on-site at Mary Lee. And we're able to teach this whole program in a different approach than if we're teaching in the classroom. Like in the classroom, when David hears the bell ring, or the bells don't ring, but everybody knows when that clock hits a point and you better stop teaching, right? And you need to go on. Well, we pay attention to time as well, but we're a cohort, and we can decide if we're going to spend the whole day on this thing, or if we're just going to spend an hour on this thing, or if we're going to do multiple things. So it changes the pedagogy. And I think that's then helpful to the student to kind of recognize that you can work at things at a different kind of pace, still get through your curriculum and student learning outcome objectives and all that kind of stuff. But after the first week of getting to know the headwaters, we call it literally Headwaters Week, where they traverse across the whole of Mary Lee on foot, and sometimes they try it with canoes through ditches. It doesn't always work very well, but they engage with the land. But then we take 8 days and canoe the Elkhart and St. Joseph River and land in Lake Michigan. We can't quite start at Mary Lee because ditches, right? They're just not big enough. But we start at Ligonier and make our way, and we do a bit of portaging around some areas, and we need a little more time. But all along the river, we're meeting with people who've been engaging with the river for years. And it could be a city official, it could be a farmer, it could be a pastor of a church, it can be higher education people that we meet, DNR kinds of people we meet. And so we pull our canoes out, and we've arranged for these people to come down and talk to us right there at the river's edge to understand what's going on. And so one of the things the students remark about, it's really interesting to see the world from the level of the river just changes. We're used to driving in cars, and you hardly ever even see the name of a river when you cross a bridge anymore, right? That used to be more common, that you would always have a river name there, a creek name. And so you can just go flying by and you don't even realize there's a watershed or water system there. But when you get in a canoe and you're at that level, and then you engage with the land around it and the people around it, it starts to slow things down. The other thing is that they actually have a real picture in their mind of a watershed. because they went from a headwater point to an exit point into Lake Michigan. So they can start to wrap their head around. That's still a big chunk, but it's much more manageable. And then we focus a lot of our field trips and other studies and interactions with that. So I think the students walk away with realizing like, oh, there is something I can do because I saw other people doing it. And they've been doing it for years. And so, yeah, I'm not going to turn it around in a moment. So I guess I'm hoping, well, it's more than me hoping. I've heard students reflect back. I've actually heard the undergrad students reflect back on what that's meant to them. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a switch in kind of the approach we take in this kind of educational setting.
Another kind of change in approach that I've really come to appreciate. So someone that didn't have this kind of education, at least in formal education, and that was educated as an engineer, they're all about problem solving. That was the essential skill or capacity that we had to take forward then into our vocations. And have come to appreciate the shift in emphasis towards inquiry, ability to show up with curiosity. As Wes Jackson would say, asking questions that go beyond the available answers and being okay with that, seeing where that leads. How have you seen that kind of manifest for the students where you are able to work with them in this rich ecological setting and how that translates into them going forward? I still encounter that prevalent or the focus on problem solving still in most contexts that we go into work with.
Yeah.
But do you see that changing?
Yeah, and we work on problem solving too. These days they talk about wicked problems, right? That's how big they are. So yeah, how do you work on it? Well, the whole idea of inquiry is very much a part of it. Like, what do you see? You know, what's going on? Recognizing that it requires multiple disciplines to do that. And I think Goshen College as a whole is very good at that too, and thinking about that it takes all the disciplines to work at really addressing lots of issues. You know, like climate change is not just the biology department's problems. The sociology department has something to do, and you know, the humanities have things to add to it. And so, it takes everybody to work on this. And the sustainability leadership semester itself can do that well. Our master's program does that. And there are ways in which the agroecology program does it. So I think this concept of inquiry, of awe and wonder informing, because that's part of where you get the hope. Some of you probably heard E.O. Wilson speak at Goshen College. How many of you actually were there when he spoke? A couple of you were. So he's now 90, and still called the world's leading entomologist. And just this week I read an article that it was an interview of him. So at age 90, he's saying, you know, I have a beef with STEM. So, right, science, technology, engineering, and math, right? He said, so you have this kid who is excited about what they saw in the environment. And, oh, you know, I'm going to study environmental science or some other science thing. And I'm excited. And then you say, well, you know, that's really great, you know, Phil, it's really great you're excited about that. But you have to understand you're also going to have to study chemistry. And if you're really going to understand biology, you've got to really understand chemistry. And you really have to understand how the technology works. And if you're really going to understand chemistry, then you better understand physics. And you probably really need to understand math. And now you just blew all the sense of wonder and hope. And the person is like, you know, what am I going to do, right? Rather than continuing to find ways to foster this. So I think E.O. Wilson has a really key point that he was reflecting on there. He's not anti any one of those things. It's how we tend to force this into people rather than engaging and exploring it with the inquiry kind of understanding.
So one of the clips that we didn't include here, but there are a pretty wide array that are in the handout there, or on the website that it takes you to, was one on the language of, and looking at kind of stewardship and creation care as one kind of focal point that's very central to some of the work with the Mennonite Creation Care Network that's based at Mary Lee. But just that whole coming back around to language as a reference point. I mean, it was there, and again, in that evolution from different types of leadership to the new eco leader.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the from going from conservation and thinking about protection and how do we hold on to what's there, to restoration and now regeneration and resilience. How have you experienced that at Mary Lee in terms of having to adapt, that being reflecting of the emerging understandings, but also in terms of to what extent are these terms, is this language adequate to really inform or guide people forward in the way that you would seek to?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right there. I do reflect on this in one of the clips in more detail, but just to, I guess, cap that out is the idea that it actually takes all of those words.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the goal is to find a single word, it's like saying there's only one way to tell someone you love that I love you. It's the only thing you can do, right? Mm-hmm. That's the only phrase. Well, I mean, it should be bigger than that and more whole than that. So while I have read and understand a lot of the problems, for example, with the word stewardship, because it can have this emphasis of lording it over, people, or lording it over the planet, it still has this merit that we have to pay attention to, that it's a responsibility is at the core of that word. And how we do the responsibility may become a problem. And we may have many examples of poor stewarding or using the word stewarding in ways that aren't as helpful. So the same thing can happen with restoration or resilience or even regeneration. And sometimes you rank them in stronger or weaker or whatever. That's a good exercise, but just to be reminded that we need all of them, I think, is an important thing. So coming back to E.O. Wilson, that's why when he wrote the book called The Creation, where he's having this dialogue with a Southern Baptist minister, and he, as a humanist entomologist, he told me this personally as well as what he writes in the book, saying that I needed to find a word that resonated, and creation has theological and spiritual meaning to people, and I will use that word because I know it will help me bridge in the communication.
Are there any further questions? If not, are there any further reflections that you have from the presentation this evening? Things that you maybe realize you left down or wish you had said or included that you want to weave in at this point?
Probably not really. I just want to express gratitude again to you and David for helping to pull out a bunch of these pieces and get them recorded well. So they need a hand for that. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining us here this evening, and of course for your years of service at Mary Lee and all you've plugged in there. And I look forward to seeing what emerges out of your new endeavors here closer to home, and all the learning that'll come out of that too. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming out here and joining us this evening.